Right.
There we go.
Can people see my slides? Nods. Okay,
Yes.
cool. So yes, I'm going to start off today with a quick sort of tour at a very entry level to how I use online experiments to do voice perception experiments. And just to start us off, I'm going to give you a quick sort of overview of the research questions I usually tend to try to tackle with my research. So I'm basically interested in what kind of information about a person we as listeners can get when we're listening to a voice. So I'm interested in identity perception. Can we recognize a person? Can we discriminate between different people? What do people make of traits in the voice? Does a voice sound trustworthy or dominant or not? And what does that mean? And how well can we perceive all this kind of information under different circumstances and from different stimuli? I'm also interested in what changes when we become familiar with a voice. So I've done a few training studies where I asked, how do we learn to recognize another person from their voice, going from unfamiliar to familiar? And I'm interested in what's in a mental representation of a familiar voice, what kind of information gets stored there. Now, what do my voice studies look like when they're online? And it was sort of a bit of a sobering experience trying to sum up what they do look like, because they're kind of all the same. In the end, I play people a sound, a voice, or two sounds, or three, something like that. And without fail, I ask them to give me a response, a perceptual judgments after. That's a trial, and that then just loops. That's what all of my studies in the end look like. So that's the kind of material you're dealing with. Generally, also, I try to keep all of my studies under 30 minutes from sort of start, info sheet and consent form to finish, ideally under 20 if possible. And I try to make no task longer than 15 minutes. These are no hard and fast rules. My studies tend to be quite repetitive and quite boring, therefore. So if I tend to nudge these time boundaries a bit, then participants start to complain and get a bit tetchy. So I think that's a fair enough amount for my kind of study, amount of time for my kind of studies to run for. Now, for this talk, I will essentially run you through some sort of dummy study, an example study, and just highlight a few things about what I tend to include in my studies to make them viable online. Some of those are specific to auditory research, others are more generic for studies online. You might have heard them before at various places today, so forgive me if I'm repeating things I've heard before. So, all of my studies follow basically the same structure. There's usually at the start an audio check where I need to make sure that people are listening to the sounds and can hear them. Then the main tasks or main task come. They take any kind of shape, 1 task, 2 tasks, training, test, whatever. That happens in the middle. And then there's a debrief usually. So I'm going to take you through all of these 3 different boxes and sort of highlight what I think is important about them and what we want to get out of them as auditory researchers. So audio check, what do we need to get out of that? We need to make sure that people can hear the sounds that we want them to hear. And if we use autoplay, and I'll go into this in a little while, we need to make sure that the sounds are actually playing back as we want them to be played back when our participants are doing the task. So how can we make sure that participants can hear our sounds? There's a very sort of quick and dirty way to do it. I've taken this from the Gorilla open materials. It's basically just a little task or a little screen at the start of an experiment where you let people play a voice reading out a word, and they need to type in the word. In order to type in the word, they need to hear the word. If they can hear the word, they can hear the sounds. Great. That's a really quick way of doing this. If you need more precision or better audio playback, you can do something like a headphones check. So you can make sure that people are listening back via headphones and not just listening through tinny computer speakers. There are, I think, a number of ways of doing this. This is the one I have used before. I'm not going to go into an awful lot of detail. Other people might cover it today. Otherwise, the reference is in the corner, so you can read up on there. But in essence, people hear 3 tones there. One of them is quieter than the other 2 when you listen to the sounds through headphones. If you listen through speakers, sounds need to travel through the air. Stuff gets cancelled out and several sounds sound similarly quiet, so you can perform the task accurately. That's a way to check that people are wearing headphones if you need that for your task. Now, autoplay. So this is, we might all remember sort of 2 years ago scrolling through Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. It's just like audio was automatically played at us, and that was not very nice. So browsers went, well, we can't have that anymore. So they disabled automatic playback of sounds. You now need to make an active gesture to start the playback. So click on play or click on unmute. Great to not be pestered on your social media not so great for auditory research. So if you don't want participants to have to click to start playing a sound for every single trial, which is perfectly fine, by the way, just not as slick, then you need to ask listeners or your participants to enable autoplay. How do we usually do that? It's a very simple set of instructions. In the end, we just ask participants, what browser do they use? And if they click on the browser within our experiment, then they just get a set of instructions that instructs them how to enable autoplay. They get forwarded to another screen that uses autoplay of sounds. If they can hear that, great, autoplay is working and they can continue. If not, they're asked to refresh their browser or contact the researcher. It's a little bit fiddly, but works perfectly fine. The only thing you need to make sure you do is keep your instructions up to date, because browsers tend to really change quite a lot in how the layout works, what they enable, what they disable. So keep them up to date every time you test. Just check that it's, the actual instructions that participants need. That's the audio check. That's kind of what I run through for every study. At this stage, I should be now aware that, or I should be hoping that my participants can in principle hear the sounds as I want them to hear them. So what do we do for the main task? Well, this is where it gets a little bit general, because everyone else wants something different from their main task. But what we all want to do with our task is, of course, to collect good quality data. How do we do this? And these are things that are, as I said, fairly general, but possibly particularly relevant for online experience. We need to give clear instructions. We might want to include vigilance trials, and we want to keep the boredom at a minimum on the participant side. So how do we do this in practice? Give clear instructions. I would say avoid jargon, especially if you test via recruitment platforms. These are not psychology students. If you tell them you're going to be listening to stimuli, they may not 100% know what's going on, which might affect your data quality. So try to really avoid jargon. Less is more, much text, lots of text. People will not take it in all. So just cut it down as much as you can. If you have to present lots of text, do it like a PowerPoint presentation, put it on separate screens so people can have it fed to them bit by bit. And also be clear. Participants, your instructions really need to be standalone in the end. They can't easily ask you for clarifications. You can't see if they look like they understand what's going on. So really try to be crystal clear. Participants will thank you, and your data quality will also thank you. Include vigilance trials. Don't trust your participants blindly that they will do the task and will do it well. So choice of vigilance trials depends on the specific experiment. There's a trillion things you can do, and only you will in the end know best what you want participants to pay attention to and how you will check that. So I can only tell you what I tend to do. I use fairly obvious vigilance trials. So I want people to pay attention to the audio. So I have audio stimuli where a voice is instructing my participants just to press a certain key or do a certain action. So in a ratings task, there would be suddenly a voice going, please press 7 now. Participants need to press 7. If they don't do it, well, they're not paying attention or are not listening at all. But you for your task know best how to check vigilance. So I can't be telling you how to do that. Then keep boredom at a minimum. I fail at this regularly because all of my tasks are quite boring, but try to make your task as engaging as possible. So make it look nice, make the instructions clear, make the instructions friendly. And if you have a really repetitive task, participants seem to be much happier when they are able to see how they're progressing through tasks. So they don't end up in a 15-minute long voice vortex where they just don't know when it's going to end. Progress bar seems to make them a lot happier and seems to just improve data quality in the end as well. And this will not be relevant or possible for all studies at all. This is actually only rarely possible, but try to keep your task short by manipulating variables or conditions between participants where you have the option to do that. If you drop a condition or can test people on only half the stimulus set, that cuts your testing time down. Participants will be less fatigued, you get better quality data, and then you just power things up by testing more participants in the end. That's the main task. And then I usually just have a debrief where I've become very fond of these debrief questionnaires, but in the end, all you need to do there is get a better idea of what happened during your study, because you can't see your participants, so you need to ask them a few additional questions, like were there any technical issues, or find out what participants made of the task. In the end, you can't see them, you don't know who they are, what's perfectly obvious to you might not be obvious to them. So if you get a bit of feedback, you can just either for the next task, work out how to improve things, or, you know, just see what they made of the task and interpret your data better that way. And finally, any amount of further data quality checks. Did they find it too hard? Was it too easy? Was it too long? These are all useful things to know. I'll just wrap up in the last couple of minutes with checking your data and checking the data quality. We talked about vigilance trials. It's very easy. Any participant who fails a number of vigilance trials gets excluded. With these easy, obvious vigilance trials, very few participants actually fail them. You can make them harder, but then it's hard to titrate how hard a vigilance trial needs to be. If you have a very hard vigilance trial, 50% of people might fail it, and that's probably not useful for you as an experimenter or for the participants. If you have obvious vigilance trials, that won't get rid of all low effort responses. So you need to do more checks, and you need to know what you need to look out for, ideally in advance. So you need to plan these things. And I mentioned ask debrief questions. Are there any reports of technical issues? You want to know about that. You need to give your participants space to express that they had technical issues. So look for that, decide how severe they can be before participants get excluded. So overall low performance on some part of the study where you would basically expect ceiling performance. Well, try to think of a cutoff. These are, again, very general sort of bits of advice. And then any other weirdness that might matter for your study. So if you're interested in response times, anything that's really slow, does it matter? Is it too slow for your study? If so, probably worth excluding these participants. Is anyone taking a break mid-task where they shouldn't and where it matters for your study? Also worth excluding these participants. However, when in doubt, there's many reasons to exclude participants. They're still humans, and I would like to keep on thinking that they in the end want to do your study with some level of enthusiasm. So don't not pay participants when you have any doubt about whether they were doing the task in good faith. Only if there's jokers who clearly didn't do anything at all, like fail the obvious vigilance trials, these get rejected and possibly not paid. Everyone else, where it's like, oh, is this person just bad at the task? Or I would, if you have the opportunity, ask you to consider to pay them, because they are humans. So just as a quick wrap up, what would I advise when you would run auditory studies online? Well, obvious, participants need to hear your sounds, so check that they can hear your sounds. Make sure your task is easy to understand and engaging, which most of the time boils down to as short as possible. And build in checks that let you monitor data quality. You need to build those in. You know how to spot whether data quality is good or bad. Just make sure you have ways for checking that. And then the only last piece of advice, which you will have heard a lot before, pilot your task. Because when you start testing and something goes wrong, it's not fun. So much data is coming in so quickly that you don't want anything to go wrong. So really pilot things a lot on yourself, on your lab mates, and also on a small budget